third day, I want to spend the first 5 at least talking with you about the latest development in the question of whether or not the census to be put out to the public in 2020 can contain a question related to whether or not individuals answering the census are citizens, or if they're not, what their status is. Congress got in the act yesterday. One of the great new congressmen from the state of Texas, Chip Roy, got on board with the idea, and he got nearly 20 other Republican lawmakers to sign a letter, sent it to Attorney General Barr, essentially saying, please, Attorney General Barr, work with the Trump administration to help articulate the reason why this question should be on the census. As you likely recall from our discussions in the last couple of days, or just what you've been reading about it, the Supreme Court did not say that the census cannot contain a question related to the citizenship of the individual answering. There's no constitutional prohibition to putting a citizenship question on the census. The stumbling block the Supreme Court didn't have to stumble on, but did, was the question of some argument about competing or conflicting reasons given for putting the question on the census. And so what Congressman Roy is saying, and the others are saying, is, well, help Attorney General Barr, please help President Trump articulate the reason that it clearly is constitutional. The question's been on the census, dozens of times. It is not true that you can't put it on the census. And they also really urge Attorney General Barr to get quick, get firm, get it done, get it back, get that reason out. I want to mention some of the people who signed on with him, Chip Roy, Mo Brooks, Jody Heiss, Bill Posey, Paul Gosar. There are about, I think, is almost 20 of them. And they are urging the Attorney General to do this because time is short. They have to get the census to the printer fairly soon. I want to tell you again, and I want to fill out something in even more depth that I talked about yesterday. In fact, I think twice when we talked about the census, I made the point that this is headed toward a constitutional crisis. And I want to tell you just a little bit more what I mean about that in today's first 5. First of all, the Constitution actually set up 3 co-equal branches of government. 3 co-equal. The judicial branch, in which the Supreme Court is the top of the judicial branch, is not intended to be superior to the other 2 branches. We have the legislative branch, which includes at the federal level Congress, at the House and the Senate. We have the judicial branch, which is all the courts at the height of it being the Supreme Court. And we have the executive branch, which is the president and the entire bureaucracy of the federal government, but that entity that executes the laws. So the problem a lot of people have with what the Supreme Court did in this case, as in others, is it really stepped into the role or the mode more like what the executive branch should be doing or the legislative branch should be doing, instead of acting like a court. Now, if the Supreme Court had said, for example, that there was a flat-out constitutional prohibition to including the question of citizenship on the census, that would be a different issue. But they didn't. They got in the middle of a skirmish between leftists in this country who don't want to have the question on the census and the administration, who is forever hassled by these leftists in this country. And they kind of just played the game the left invited them to play. They got down into the weeds about whether or not the particular reason offered by one person conflicted sufficiently with the reason offered by another person, and sent the case back. The Supreme Court sent the case back to a lower court to say, help them sort through, figure out the real reason for the census question, the census to include the citizenship question. Folks, it's none of the Supreme Court's business. There is no basis for the Supreme Court to decide. They're going to decide whether the entity that has responsibility for the census constitutionally, which is the executive branch, there's no reason the Supreme Court has the right or should be in the middle of reassessing, relitigating the question of whether or not the census should include the citizenship question. Was good or bad or good enough reasons or not? So there was a growing concern of this concept of judicial supremacy, the idea that the Supreme Court is acting as though it is higher than the other 2 branches of the federal government and literally dictating things to the executive branch that it really shouldn't be doing. So this is why I say it's headed toward a constitutional crisis, because the American left has succeeded in the last 20, 30, 40 years to get their left-wing policies, their left-wing preferences on policies forced into law by the courts issuing decisions because those left-wing policies the left loves so much could not get those policies passed through Congress, which is really the entity among the three branches that represents the people. It's like the left is taking the power away from the people who elect the government, elect Congress to make laws, and essentially end up making laws through the judicial branch. And at the end of the day, the American people are losing their place as we the people. So it's an ongoing struggle in Washington, unsettled. I don't know how it's going to come out, but I'm telling you that the energy and passion among conservatives to not let this latest left-wing effort to dictate to the executive branch, to the President Trump and his government, dictate to them what can or cannot be on the census by raising truly just silly level arguments about whether or not the reason given was a good enough reason, did it conflict with somebody else's reason. So Chip Roy and other members of Congress have stepped into the battle, and I'm going to tell you folks, we'll be talking about this more, I'm going to guess, this month as we head toward having the census go to printing. But the idea of having the other two branches of the federal government step up and say, you know what, Supreme Court, you actually don't run the whole country. You're not the supreme, you may be the arbiter of constitutional cases, but you don't get to step in the executive branch and rethink for them what they should or shouldn't have done on a particular issue. This is really, that's why I say it's headed toward a constitutional crisis. And I'm going to guess, if I had to guess right now, President Trump is going to put that question of citizenship on the census one way or another. Hopefully he finds a way that he at least gets the backing of Attorney General Barr and the Justice Department and goes ahead and sends it out. Because I think again, I've mentioned many times on the show, the reason the left is hysterical about the idea of having that question on the census is because the left has been trying very, very hard in the last, I don't even know, decades, at least the last 10, 12, maybe even 20 years, to minimize the concept of citizenship, to pretend it doesn't matter, to diminish the idea of America's borders and our national sovereignty, the left-wing mindset that is just not respectful of, interested in bolstering and protecting the idea of American citizenship and American sovereignty. This is a huge issue to them. If the American people become aware in response to the census that we have maybe 30 million people living in our country who do not have any right to be here, and those, by the way, whatever answer the census would give, it'll still be the smallest. It'll be a conservative estimate because there will be people who won't fill out the census if that question is on there. So be it. So we have an inaccurate summary. I think that's the main concern the left has, and then the related concern of all the congressional seats. States like California will lose once the citizenship numbers are known, and then we actually have proportional representation in Congress of citizens only, not all the non-citizens the left keeps on letting in to this precious country.